And that allowed us, because that's when the land was returned
Mhm.
onto the provinces and onto the people, hence making them sovereign nations, to allow us to hold a constitutional convention at that time. But the one in 1982 was from the Queen's Proclamation. And the Queen's Proclamation said, it referred to Section 58, which took you to Section 59, which took you to 23(1)(a) to be repealed. It was never repealed because Quebec never signed off on it, being that if that was repealed, Canada would no longer be a bilingual. And so René Lévesque and the Parti Québécois never signed off on it. Hence, the Second Proclamation was never written. Hence, it was never ratified. In other words, it's in suspended animation. It's there,
Okay.
but it doesn't actually exist in law.
So all the more reason to have a constitutional convention to kind of settle that and finalize that with Quebec support.
Absolutely. Well, what we would do now, because it's been so long, is we would have to go into each of the provinces and hold a constitutional convention to seat, for example, in Alberta, a de jure government in Alberta, and then Saskatchewan, et cetera, et cetera. And over time, if we so chose to, as the people who wanted to unite all of the provinces under one constitution, then we could go ahead and hold a constitution for a federal authority if we so chose to. But it's really not up to you and I to make these decisions. It's up to the people to make those decisions. And that's basically what I teach, going back and forth across Canada for the last 5 years. And doing my seminars is giving people the knowledge on the, first of all, you got to know your history. So we do a little bit of a history lesson. And then we break that down into bite-sized chunks, for lack of a better term, so that it's edible. I wrote a book. It's up on our website. It's called Constitutional Committees, and it walks you through the whole process of how to hold a constitutional convention, how to elect your delegates, and actually how to write a constitution. And it's a step-by-step method of doing that. And so I suggest,
So as a first step, getting a province, you're mentioning Alberta. So inside Alberta,
yes.
we have to do a constitutional convention. Is that to give Alberta its own constitution that we bring forward?
Yes.
Or is that, okay. So each province needs to have their own, and then we come together under a unified one?
If we so chose to. Now, just like in the United States, the first 13 states all had their own constitutions through constitutional conventions written. Yes?
Okay.
Which allowed them to come together under what they called Articles of Confederation. Okay, in 1777, they found that the federal authority that was created under the Articles of Confederation didn't really have much teeth, so they wanted something a little bit stronger. So they in 1781 or 82, I believe it was, they held a constitutional convention in Philadelphia, where all 13
this is what
states
Hamilton's
sent their,
about, right? That show Hamilton.
yeah, there you
okay,
go.
sorry. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Philadelphia.
Yeah, and so they held the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where they actually wrote the Constitution for the United States. They put it out for ratification. It was rejected, and it came back, and then they put the first 10 amendments in there, which is the Bill of Rights. It went out for ratification, and then it was ratified by all 13 original states, and allowed that authority to then be in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So really, that's really what we have to do. They did it in Iceland in 2012. It was very straightforward. It took them from arresting their government and the bankers to realizing that they couldn't amend the Constitution and actually had to tear it up, to holding a constitutional convention, electing 50 delegates to write it, and then ratifying it. Took them all of 30 days to do that.
Wow. So when you say arrested the politicians and bankers, like criminally arrested or stopped them from working?
Criminally arrested. No. They put them in jail for, well, the government was going to give the bankers $3.6 billion of taxpayer money to bail out the bankers. And guess what? The people did not like that. So that was the end of that. And I'm talking the police officers worked with the people to do that. It wasn't just the people rushing into the parliament and into the banks to grab these people. No, the police were actually part of that action, and they did bring them to justice. And I thought that was wonderful.
Interesting. Yeah. So that was 2012, you said.
2012, they actually put that together, yes.
Oh, freaking internet.
Civics from every person's understanding for several decades to make sure that nobody knew it in the process. This is why it's so much simpler in smaller countries, I think, like Iceland and Barbados. And by the way, both of those movements are, to seat themselves as de jure governments, have been kind of hijacked. They know what the people that have to recognize the jurisdiction, and this is something that Canadians are learning, going through the learning curve hardcore over the last 5 years specifically, is the difference of jurisdiction and impact to the discussion upon jurisdiction. So when it comes to this level of discussion, right now I see that there's other Canadians, people in Canada with less than noble causes of wanting to maintain Canada as we know it, that we're going to get blindsided by if we aren't informed as to the real jurisdiction and situation. Nobody's going to be able to make educated decisions in their best interest. If, for example, the people in Quebec that fully the infiltrated government of Canada is over and they move to secure their future and their right to self determination, which Trudeau labels the Quebec problem. If they take advantage of that and nobody else in Canada has a clue what the hell is going on, we get duped every step of the way again. And so this is my motivation with stimulating some of these kinds of conversations in Canada, because this is what the smoke and mirrors in all of this political charade is intended to make sure that Canadians stay oblivious to. So
And I saw the same thing because when I started this conversation as well, about 6 months ago or so, uh, even longer than that, some of the first pushback I got is, "We got bigger issues. Don't divide us." That kind of stuff. Same thing you're talking about. But my question back to them is, do we? Do we really have bigger issues than getting our government back to the people? Like, what bigger issue is there? Like, once we have that done, everything else seems like second nature and we can tackle it. So, Doug, when I'm pushing back on these people and saying, "Are you sure that you are looking at this right?" Because this is the biggest issue, whether or not we are a country, whether or not we are sovereign, and whether or not we've created the Constitution the way we want it to be by the people. What bigger issue is there? Am I correct on that?
There is no bigger issue. The government today are, and down to the states, they've usurped the power of the people down there as they have here in Canada. They believe they rule us, that they are our rulers, not our public servants. Where we here in Canada, that being that we don't have a proper constitution, they work under the de facto doctrine, and with that, they truly believe that they are above us as our rulers, and that the laws apply to us, but not to them. And you just have to look at how Trudeau handled the event in Ottawa with the trucker convoy. He called in almost the military under the Emergency Powers Act for kids in a bouncy castle and singing "Kumbaya," and just all the people wanted was his attention to talk to him about being a public servant, about not usurping the power of the people. And all he did was simply prove to everybody that that's what he was. He was the ruler, and he did not care what the people had to say because it didn't matter to him. They will do what I tell them to do or suffer that consequence. And so we need to take that power and put it back into where it belongs, in our hands, we the people's hands. And they are trying to do that in the U.S. now. They believe, sadly enough, that good old Donald Trump is going to be their savior. They will find out that, as smart as Donald is, and he is a smart guy, but he doesn't have what it takes to reseat the republic properly. In other words, he has certain individuals get to be president, and whilst in presidences of silver, so to speak. Here in Canada, we the people need to just do it. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from doing it. As a matter of fact, when the Donbass did it in 2022, and the UN stepped in and said, "Oh, well, you can't do that, blah, 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 you can't join Russia." Mr. Putin pointed out Section 1 of the UN Charter that created the UN and said, "Well, so what you're saying is that you no longer recognize self-determination. Is that true, Mr. Gutierrez?" And Mr. Gutierrez went, "Yeah, crap. Okay, right. We recognize the Donbass."
Yeah, you got caught with pants on that one. Wayne, I don't remember this in school. I don't remember them teaching us this in civics at all, or social studies, or anything like that this was even an option. I remember the Dominion of Canada stuff. I remember the Charter stuff. I remember even Brian Peckford and others, but I don't remember this. Why not? Why weren't we taught this?
This has been going on in Canada since taxation became a legitimate thing, and all of a sudden, Canada had just gotten through a major world war, a Great Depression. Nobody could have been bothered by civics or learning or caring. Canada was in a really good spot for 50 years. So there really wasn't a need or a necessity for it. And Canadians weren't desperate. And now, this is the thing that bothers me and eats at my core is looking at, what I see happening around us right now, and the sheer desperation and weakness in our Canadian people. That hurts me to my heart and soul, because, when I hear these conversations, oh, we just got to get them out. We just got to do this. We've accepted this culture of accepting the lesser of two evils just for survival. And seeing all of the abuses and people having their reality shattered, understand when they're finally getting it through the heel of the jackboot, real this documentations that were supposed to protect us, i.e. the charters of rights and freedoms, and these, they really hold no more protection than monopoly paper. And people have become so beaten down and demoralized and robbed through all of this. And for me, what's triggered me was understanding what odious debt was as compared to the suffering. So when I see Canadians that are subjecting themselves to just more of the same, and you ask them, where are the protections for Canadians, for example. This is a big one that Canadians should be waking up to right now. So if we elect Pierre, heck, even if we elect Max, how do they take anything back from the Senate that already goes through the Senate? How do they undo anything that the successive governments from Brian Mulroney forward, as CSIS has articulated, have been compromised through foreign interference? How is it that anything in the last 50 years can be trusted, and there is not a snowball's hope in hell, not trying to be rude, that any of these guys are going to get any of this World Economic Forum, Geneva, Davos influence? They're not going to unwind any of that when they can't even get the guys, except for Max, to say anything about it, and the rest of the parties are so controlled and signed off on the same damn documentation. The Pierre is signed to the same attaboy list under these quote unquote non-binding agreements, and people think that there's a political solution. I just don't get it, and it hurts my heart. And I've tried to speak to the people at the upper levels of government, and I asked them, would you be interested in seating into Jure Canada? And they look at me and laugh and say, why? We rule through implied consent. So they're sworn to a system. They're obligated to it, so there isn't a single person in elected office that even can willingly take part in this, so it has to be the people. And I see them just being crushed more and more, and their will to resist being crushed more and more and more under this jackboot of manifested destruction and destabilization. And at the end of the day, if we exerted what was our rightful right since 1931 and went through the work, there's no easy button, do the work, that trillions of dollars of debt goes with the criminals. That's not our debt. We can literally set our grandchildren